Now, I have an amazing story for you guys. Let's go over here. Okay. This is some of my favorite stories. It is the science of our brains and how it leads us to our political opinions. Now, is this the only factor? Of course not. There's always a number of factors to be considered in figuring out why people act the way they do, and in this case, vote the way they do, and choose their particular ideology. But there are some amazing findings in science about how the conservative mind works as opposed to the liberal mind. And so we've told you about some of this before, and fear has a huge role to play. But now there's a new twist and a number of studies talking about a different emotion that might make all the difference in the world, and that is disgust. All right, before I get to that though, I want to remind you of some of the work that we've highlighted in the past. So for example, John Hibbing and Kevin Smith at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln and John Alford at Rice University in Houston had done a study that concluded this. Compared with liberals, they'd previously found conservatives generally pay more attention and react more strongly to a broad array of threats. For example, they have more pronounced startle response to loud noises, and they gaze longer at photos of people displaying angry expressions. Look, that does seem to fit in fairly well with what we see with our own eyes, as you'll continue to see throughout this amazing story. The conservatives fear easily. Here come the Muslims, oh my God. They passed an anti-Sharia law in Oklahoma. They're afraid the Muslims are going to take over Oklahoma. Do they frighten easily? Yes. Okay, then the Latinos are coming and et cetera, and then watch out for the gays and the transgender are going into your bathroom. And we'll talk about more of that as we go on as well. But let me give you more details. Using MRA, scientists from the University of College London have found that studies who identify themselves as conservatives have a larger amygdala than self-described liberals. This brain structure is involved in emotion processing and is especially reactive to fearful stimuli. It's possible that an oversized amygdala could create a heightened sensitivity that may cause one to habitually overreact to anything that appears to be a potential threat, whether it actually is one or not. Okay, now, so that is one part of the physiology of conservatives that are slightly different. Now, again, it doesn't apply to every conservative, and so I don't want people doing stereotypes overall, but I am sharing the science with you because it is fascinating. So it appears that on average, they have larger amygdalas, which is the fear center, okay? Now, we turn to the new studies on the issue of disgust. So a political scientist went to Reed Montague, who's a neuroscientist at Virginia Tech at the Human Neuroimaging Laboratory, and asked him to do some studies about mapping the brain and the reaction that conservatives and liberals have to the emotion of disgust and how it might influence their political opinions. And the neuroscientist Montague was deeply skeptical. And then they did the studies and they found out amazing results. So let me share that with you. The brains of liberals and conservatives reacted in wildly different ways to repulsive pictures. Both groups reacted, but different brain networks were stimulated. Just by looking at the subject's neural responses, in fact, Montague could predict with more than 95% accuracy whether they were liberal or conservative. That's amazing. So based on how you react to images that are considered disgusting, we can tell with 95% certainty whether you're going to be a conservative or a liberal. At least according to this one study, but there are a number of studies which I'm again going to share with you right now. The scientist said, quote, "I was completely flabbergasted by the predictability of the results." Okay, now let's talk about some of the other studies. Numerous studies have found that high levels of sensitivity to disgust tend to go hand in hand with, quote, a conservative ethos. That ethos is defined by characteristics such as traditionalism, religiosity, support for authority and hierarchy, sexual conservatism, and distrust of outsiders. Now, the distrust of outsiders is perhaps one of the most important ones, but I also wanted to point out the other parts of it. See, I used to be a Republican, but I was a liberal Republican back when I was growing up. And I wondered, so is, which side do I fall on here? Because now obviously I'm very progressive. And I think that, and we've gone over this a lot in the show and in the post game for the members, et cetera, that I was always a progressive, and I was misled into thinking that Republicans actually cared about balanced budgets, and they did a wonderful job marketing about how they cared about small businesses, et cetera, et cetera. But when you look to see, how people react, that is where you can see the difference. And in my case, I never understood why you should listen to authority for authority's sake. And the conservative mind is structured differently. They do believe that, because to them, order is really important. And then in religion, there are these rules about cleanliness. Now, some of it is very logical. You don't want to get sick, and especially back in the day when those texts were written, that was even more relevant, and we didn't have modern science. But a lot of it seemed to be rules for the sake of rules. Well, hey, look, you got to make sure that your beard is a certain way, and this applies across many different religions. And to me, that seemed irrational. We live in the modern world where we have medicine, and the size of our beard is totally irrelevant. Whether we cover our head or whether we eat bacon or drink alcohol is largely irrelevant to whether we actually protect ourselves from illness. These are obviously outdated rules, but for the conservative mind, they enjoy and need that order and hierarchy to make sure that they are safe. So, and protected from things that they feel they need protection from. So we'll get into that as well. Now, let me quote a couple of other scientists here. And by the way, this is a great story from Kathleen McAuliffe in The Atlantic that I'm quoting from. She explains, as Pizarro, Inbar, and the other authors of the study write in the Journal of Social, Psychological, and Personality Science, this result suggests that disgust sensitivity is related to conservatism across a wide variety of cultures, geographic regions, and political systems. So this isn't just about America, and it's certainly not just about Trump, but we will get to him at the end. It's about human nature, and this has been true throughout time and throughout different places. In fact, there's a study from Denmark. Let's go to that. As the scientist there explains, disgust influences our political views as much as, or even more, than long recognized factors such as education and income bracket. Now that's how political scientists normally conceive of it and have talked about it for most of my life. But now neuroscientists and others are beginning to realize, no, that our emotions make a bigger difference. Okay, and by the way, the scientists do not judge this. So they say, hey, look, maybe you can argue that conservatives, if you're then in the ideological realm, are being cautious and rightfully cautious. Or you could argue that they're being unduly afraid in these modern times. That's a decision for you to make. They're just telling you what the reality of our brains and other body parts are, because it turns out the tongue is also really relevant. I know, this is mind-blowing, it's fascinating. That's why I love the story and wanted to share it with you. Okay, so now let's go back to the main study that we were talking about in regards to Montague. And McAuliffe quotes here, as we move about in the world, a sizable volume of research shows our minds are constantly searching our surroundings for contaminants, moldy leftovers, garbage spilling out of trash cans, a leaky sewage pipe. And when their brain detects them, it triggers sudden feelings of revulsion. Confronted, we withdraw from the threat. The mechanism is part of what's known as the behavioral immune system, and it is as vital for survival as the fight or flight response. So understand that, first of all, that all humans have this. The question is the degree to which you have it. So as I discovered later in life, I don't have it to a large degree. It turns out I was progressive all along. That's part of why I left the Republican Party, also why I left religion. And everybody also has culture that influences them. So if you grow up in a particularly conservative area, you might be taught to be a Republican or conservative, to which, to some degree, that's what applied to me. But then you get to your natural self as you evolve if you have an open mind, right? And obviously influenced by all these factors that you might not even be aware of. So let's keep going. They say some scientists, notably the psychologist Corey Fincher at the University of Warwick in England and the biologist Randy Thornhill at the University of New Mexico, theorized that foreigners, at least in the past, would have been more likely to expose local populations to pathogens against which they had no acquired defenses. And other scientists think germ fears piggyback on the negative stereotypes about foreigners common throughout history, the notion that they're dirty, eat bizarre foods, and have looser sexual mores. Now, this is also interesting because back in the day, there was a little bit of truth to that. Not that the foreigners were dirty, everybody was a foreigner, but they might carry pathogens that your local village was not familiar with, and that could spread disease quicker. But that original kernel of truth is, of course, enormously outdated now, but it has stuck in our DNA and in some of our brains. Actually, all of our brains, but again, to what degree is the question at hand. And so, and politically, that has gone through all of these different generations. And that fear of the others, the fear of the foreigner, the fear of disease is used by conservative politicians to trigger conservative voters into voting in a certain direction because of that fear and disgust that is created in their brains. So more on this. More recent investigations by Peterson and Aora suggest that those with high disgust sensitivity tend to be leery of any stranger, not just foreigners. They view casual social acquaintances with a certain amount of suspicion. A robust finding replicated across 3 studies with a total of 4,400 participants showed. The implication is clear. Disgust and distrust are somehow linked. And you can see that in the politicians throughout your lifetime. Watch out for the immigrants coming in. One of Steve Bannon and a lot of the right wing's favorite books is one that came out of France. And it's I believe, The Camp of the Saints. And it talks about how there's a boat full of South Asian immigrants coming to Europe, and they carry disease with them, and they have loose sexual customs, and they're having orgies nonstop, and then they eat their own feces and these disgusting things. I mean, it's word for word designed for the conservative mind. Watch out for feces, disgust. There's the sexual issues that again bring out the disgust of foreigners with disease. I mean, it is meant to trigger people, and it did. It triggered Steve Bannon, Steve Miller, and so many others. And unfortunately, they have taken over the body politic here in America, and obviously mainly in the form of Donald Trump. And again, we'll get to him at the end. So here's one of the studies that in particular, and I want you to get a sense of how they did this study and the results from it. And again, every part of this is amazing. Another experiment involved 2 groups of subjects with similar political ideologies. One group was exposed to a vomit-like scent as the subjects filled out an inventory of their social values. The other group filled out the inventory in an odorless setting. Those in the first group expressed more opposition to gay rights, pornography, and premarital sex than those in the second group. The putrid scent even inspired significantly more agreement with biblical truth. Okay, so there's a second part of the story, but think about that. So that's not separating conservatives and liberals. That's an average set of people that involves conservatives, liberals, everybody else, right? But when you subject them to something that we generally think of as disgusting, like a vomit-like smell, they become more conservative. They become more against gay rights, pornography. They become more religious. I need order. I need this disgust to stop. And that is all subconscious. Nobody's consciously thinking about it. That's why part of why this is so amazing. Let's go to the second part of the study. Variations on these studies using, and this is funny but true, fart spray, foul taste, and other creative disgust elicitors reveal a consistent pattern. When we experience disgust, we tend to make harsher moral judgments. Okay, wow. Now we get to tongues. Okay, get a load of this. Just when you thought this couldn't get any more amazing. It turns out the taste receptors in our mouths are structured a little differently, and they make a huge difference in our psychology as well. So let me tell you more about that. Taste receptors, they knew, are concentrated in fungiform papillae. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Those spongy little bumps on your tongue. The greater the density of papillae, the more acute your taste, okay? So the more of those bumps you have, the more acute your taste is. So what does that lead to? The degree to which subjects' views tilted to the right was, they found, in direct proportion to the density of papillae on their tongue. So they would give people substances that tasted a little bitter, and now bitter is somewhat associated with things that might be toxic, like leftover milk, etc. That's your body saying, reject this, right? So people with more sensitive tongues reacted more to the bitter taste, and it turns out they are more conservative. They are more prone to get triggered by disgust, and first of all, to literally sense disgust and then be triggered by it. I don't know if you guys are as amazed as I am, but I love science. And again, do not judge people purely based on this, okay? But it's just for your edification, and it does seem to, at least explain some of the things that we see politically in our world. Now, does this make people a little bit easier to manipulate? Unfortunately, the answer is yes. So David Pizarro, a psychology professor that I quoted earlier, explains, it's such a low level, almost non-cognitive emotion that you really aren't thinking that much about it. So it's non-cognitive, meaning again, you're not consciously thinking, oh, I taste something disgusting or I smell something disgusting, that's gonna make me more, so of course you're not consciously thinking that, it's non-cognitive in that sense. He explains that emotion is more reflexive than reflective. There's a saying that a conservative uses, facts don't care about your emotions. It turns out your emotions don't care about facts, especially if you're a conservative. And then one more from Pizarro, he says, that is the rhetorical strength of disgust. It's a little hack. You hack into brains pretty quickly and easily by making them feel disgust, bypassing logic and reason to sway judgment. Now, let me show you real world examples. That's the science. Now, have right-wing demagogues used this in the past? Oh, and you know they have. But I want to remind you of some specific examples. We'll go to the most extreme, and that's Nazi propaganda. And this is from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum website. They explain that in that propaganda, Jews were often described as an alien race that fed off the host nation and poisoned its culture. Now, the Holocaust Memorial Museum has no connection to those scientists. They wrote this stuff before any of these studies were even done, let alone published. And so those two things are not connected. But instinctually, those right-wing demagogues, they knew it. They knew that there is something that if you say that the other is filled with disease, is an alien, and it's infecting us, it would cause disgust and hatred and enough demagoguery to target those people that they had chosen to victimize. More from that. The Jews were not the only group excluded from the vision of the, quote, national community. Propaganda helped to define who would be excluded from the new society and justified measures against the outsiders. You see familiar themes here. These so-called outsiders included Jews, Roma, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Germans viewed as genetically inferior and harmful to, quote, the national health. Hey, it's disease, it's an infection, it's a virus. You must reject it from your body politic. And obviously that led to horrible, horrible results. But let me give you one last one that is even more clear. These scenes, again, this is the Holocaust Memorial Museum describing this. These scenes compare Jews to rats that carry contagion, flood the continent, and devour precious resources. It's almost as if the Nazis read the scientific literature and decided to use it to manipulate the masses. Of course, they didn't at the time, but they knew it in their bones. So now we come to modern day America. Just a couple of quick ones. We could do this all day long. But listen to the language that Donald Trump uses when describing immigrants. He says, you wouldn't believe how bad these people are. These aren't people, these are animals. And we're taking them out of the country at a level and at a rate that's never happened before. Back in the day, these people are rats, they're outsiders, they're damaging the national health. These days, these people are animals, they're outsiders, and they're damaging us, and we're rejecting them from our national community to protect ourselves. And if that wasn't clear enough, he also sent this tweet. Democrats are the problem, Trump said. They don't care about crime and want illegal immigrants, no matter how bad they may be, to pour into and infest our country. So that is not an accident. And he knows that that triggers that emotion of disgust. He might not know the science because he can't read past one page, but he's seen it in the reaction in the crowds. He's seen it in the way that Republicans give him feedback. So when he talks about animals, the outsiders, the foreigners, we have to ban all the Muslims. We have to build a wall to protect ourselves from the foreign invaders who will infest us. Infest us. He is doing a tradition that unfortunately goes back a long, long time in conservative politics, and that is built to trigger the conservative brain, to get people to reject outsiders, foreigners, and people that they consider the others. I'm hoping now that you know that, and please tell others, spread this video or the articles, and we'll have the link to the article below. This is great work. Because knowledge might, just might, be able to overcome what is going on in the back of our heads without us being aware of it. So at least now we know the phenomenons that are part of what causes the political ideology that you see in your world. All right, we got to take a quick break. When we come back, we got more amazing news for you guys. Come right back.